Okay, so it is 3/21/17. Happy spring, by the way. Yesterday spring began. Those first 23 pairs are called autosomes. And you can think of autosome if you want to. That's one that nobody's ever come up with. And autosomes have, now, is there more than one gene on each of these chromosomes? Yes. There are many genes on most chromosomes. Now, are all chromosomes the same size? You're looking at a picture of them. No. There are some shrimpy little chromosomes. Those shrimpy little chromosomes have fewer genes. That's the way it works. You can fit a lot more genes on chromosome 1 than you can on chromosome 16. Now, chromosome 16 may still have a lot of genes because, remember, DNA is very, very tiny. But there are just not as many. They're not all equal. And because we have mapped the entire human genome, this was not the case when I was in high school or in college. We knew how many chromosomes there were, but we hadn't yet read the code, the genetic code for one entire human. We now know, oh, the gene for that is located at this spot on chromosome 10. Wow. We didn't used to know that. That's pretty new. That's in the last 10 to 15 years. So we know if there is a genetic issue, we actually can pinpoint the exact spot on a chromosome where the gene that controls that exists, which is actually pretty amazing. Whew. It's kind of astounding. So these first 22 pairs are the autosomes, and they have most of the genes that control most of the things your body is doing. So list something that your genes have to do. How about tell your body how to build a cell? How about tell your cells how to divide and reproduce? How about tell your body how to process sugars? How about tell your body how to absorb nutrients? How about tell your body how to grow an eyeball? How about tell your body, I mean, aside from what color your hair is or what color your eyes are or what color your skin is or how big your nose is or how small your feet are or how tall you are, all the basic things that you take for granted every second are controlled by a gene. And many of those genes are on those first 22 chromosomes. There's sometimes called like the body chromosomes, somatic chromosomes. Somatic refers to your body. The 23rd pair are the sex chromosomes. So those sex chromosomes determine biological sex, male, female. The sex chromosomes, females get what?
2 X's.
XX. Males get XY, which means, gentlemen, that you are running down the road with no spare. It means that males who have a single X and a single Y have no backup plan for some genes, because the genes that exist on the X and Y chromosomes aren't just things that control what are called secondary sexual characteristics. So primary sexual characteristics are whether you have a penis or a vagina, whether you have testes or ovaries. Those are the primary sexual characteristics. Everything else that we think of as we look at somebody and we go, that's a male, that's a female, those are secondary characteristics. The shape of the jaw, whether or not you grow a lot of facial hair at puberty, the development of, or not development of breasts, how wide your shoulders are, how wide your hips are. Those are secondary characteristics. So the primary is basically your plumbing, if you're producing eggs or sperm. The secondary are all those other things that usually line up in a particular way, but not always. So there are some exceptions to that. You should have, if everything progresses perfectly, when egg and sperm meet, I really do feel like there should be like the little, romantic, cute movie music, like 2 people meet, every time I say egg and sperm meet. But we'll skip that. If every time egg and sperm meet, the egg has got 23 chromosomes and the sperm has got 23 chromosomes. Nobody has an extra, and nobody's missing one. You end up with 1 for each pair, and you end up with 46. You ever make a mistake? I do, all the time, every day. generally before 8 o'clock in the morning. Before 8 o'clock, I can pretty much guarantee I'll have done something dumb. So does your body. So do the bodies of all living things. You are making a bunch of mistakes right now. Your body manages to fix most of those. Your body kind of has editors that go along behind and make sure everything went the way it was supposed to. But every now and then they miss something. And sometimes you end up with an egg or a sperm that's either missing one chromosome or has 2 copies of a chromosome. Usually, so if it's 23 plus 23, that often equals baby for humans. Not always. I mean, there can still be things that go wrong. There can still be what are called fatal. You've had a computer malfunction where it says fatal exception has occurred. There are still things that can go wrong, even when 23 meets 23, that causes a fatal exception, and then there's a miscarriage, very often even before a woman knows she's pregnant. If instead of 23 meets 23, we have 22 meets 23, probably no baby. If we have 24 meets 23, there's probably no baby because it's the wrong number of chromosomes. And it just doesn't work. There are too many sets of instructions. Has anybody ever tried to do something while 5 people were trying to tell you what to do? That happens to me at home a lot. I have like 3 individuals speaking at me trying to tell me how to do something at the same time, and I just can't do it. That's usually when you know. If there are too many sets of instructions or a missing set of instructions, the body can't be formed. All those jobs we said genes do, growing cells, growing lungs, growing eyeballs, growing bones, all that stuff requires just the right sets of instructions. If you have too many or too few, then it doesn't work. And so typically that means that you don't have what's called a viable fetus. So a viable fetus is one that has more or less the right number of chromosomes and that can progress and become a human who can survive in the world. Okay? Now, okay, so what about cases where you get 24 plus 23 and you do get a baby? Those are called trisomies. The prefix tri means how many? 3. Many of you rode tricycles. A trisomy is when you have 3 copies of one chromosome. And in the case of Down syndrome, it's chromosome 21. And this is totally survivable. Lots of children are born every year with Down syndrome. I think it's the most common chromosomal birth. They still call it a birth defect, which I'll give you my spiel on normal versus ordinary. So it is the most common that I know of trisomy to occur. And it's very survivable. Now, that's only one chromosome that's affected, and it's a really shrimpy little chromosome. If you look at 21, look at how teeny that is. It's not a whole lot of genes. Yet, how many of you know somebody who has Down syndrome? Okay, some of you do, some of you don't. So people who have Down syndrome have distinctive facial characteristics. These days, usually parents know before a child is born if Down's is suspected. They can do a really simple blood test now at about 10 weeks of pregnancy that gets you a full chromosomal picture of the baby. People with Down's they're missing a fold above the eyelid, so there's no crease in the eyelid. There's also some characteristic lack of muscle tone, so babies with Down syndrome tend to walk a little bit later. They tend to have less developed muscle tone in general. As babies, they're often... How many of you have ever held an infant? Niece, nephew, sibling, friend, neighbor, some random child who was foisted into your arms? Okay. A baby with Downs very often feels kind of floppy. They don't hold their muscles as tightly as a baby without Downs. And there are a whole series of... There are also some characteristic heart defects very often with Downs. Very often people with Downs don't live as long as they might if they didn't have that trisomy because there's... I forget what the exact issue with the heart is. I don't know if it just has to do with muscle tone. But there are also some cognitive disabilities, though what we know now that we didn't used to know is that those are not as severe as we used to think. There are people with Downs who actually go on to live pretty what we would call ordinary lives. And they may not end up as nuclear physicists, but hey, a lot of people don't end up as nuclear physicists. A lot of them can do pretty simple jobs and have pretty satisfying lives. One of the things we know now is that, so there are a couple things. When a baby walks, really changes the trajectory for their intellectual development. Do you know why? When you can get to stuff and touch stuff and see stuff, you're thinking. And so babies who walk early on tend to actually end up scoring higher on academic content or on intellectual capacity. So the delay in walking for Downs babies is part of that academic or intellectual delay. There have been some interesting therapies recently, and this actually was started by a mother who had a child with Downs, and her first child had not had Downs and had walked pretty early, and she felt very strongly that early walking influenced intellectual development. She was absolutely correct, and she basically built a harness for the second child who had Downs, and put this kid on a treadmill at like 11 months. And would do like 15 minutes of this therapy twice a day, every day, and this child walked statistically much earlier, and as a result, you saw less of a cognitive delay. So it's really fascinating. And they also, here's the sad truth. If we assume that you have no potential, and we kind of toss you in a room and we never try to teach you anything, guess what? You have no potential and you're never going to... It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we used to treat people who had what might have been really minor cognitive delays that way, those minor delays ended up being pretty major. And we just know better now. We didn't used to. We used to seriously just cheat people out of a life. And that doesn't have to happen. So anyway, that is one of the trisomies. Just a few genes, though, give you this whole range of effects. You have the muscle tone issues, you have the heart issues, you have the characteristic facial features. That's a trisomy. It's not the only trisomy that exists, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those things as we go, but that's the best known trisomy. There are also trisomies of the sex chromosomes. There are cases where people have an XXY. There are people who have XXX. And those are survivable also. And there are names for those chromosomal syndromes. One is Turner's, one is Klinefelter's, and I can never remember which is which without looking it up. Maybe that makes me a bad biology teacher. But anyway, there are trisomies that are survivable. Here's one I have for you. If you have 3 copies of one chromosome, is that normal? If you have 3 copies of one chromosome, that's normal for you. Remember, folks, normal is just a setting on the washing machine. Normal for you is whatever is you. Ordinary or usual, the way things most commonly happen, is very often what we mean when we say normal. So there's a wide range, and we still call them genetic abnormalities. There's certainly genetic differences, but I would argue that if that's your genetic makeup, that's pretty normal for you. It's been that way from the moment that your genetic makeup existed, and it's not usual, might not be ordinary, but it is normal for you. It might be exceptional. Who knows? So, chromosomes, trisomies. Let's talk about one more word. Okay, if things are proceeding the way they usually do, if we've got the ordinary numbers of everything, 23 plus 23 gives us a fertilized egg with 46. That egg will continue to divide, and it'll go from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, 32, 64, you get the picture. Doubling pretty rapidly, actually. That fertilized egg has got a full set of chromosomes. It is a diploid cell. Anything that is diploid has got 2 of each chromosome. So chromosome 1, 2, 3, it's got 2 copies of each. These cells are each, do you know the word? They have half the number necessary for a normal cell. They are haploid. If we tried to put two diploid cells together, we would have an organism with way more copies of the genetic material than it needs. There are a few really crazy, weird species where this happens. Wheat is actually one of them. There are things called hexaploid wheats. They have 6 copies of every chromosome. I don't know how they function. But I don't have to because I'm not an agricultural geneticist. So, okay. So we got haploid cells, we got diploid cells. What are eggs and sperm really called? Starts with a G. What? Did I hear it? Have you heard the word gamete? You have. Good. So eggs and sperm are each gametes. Eggs are the female gamete, sperm are the male gamete. And when we fuse 2 haploid gametes, we get a diploid fertilized egg. Pretty cool. How do we figure out what kind of traits an offspring might have? This is the heart of what we call Mendelian genetics. So we're looking at individual traits one by one. And I think the best way to do this, actually, is to just give you some gametes. So, catch. Somebody. Catch! Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, my God. I've never actually hit a student before. Without opening your gamete, tell me what you would find inside your gamete. DNA in the form of, how is DNA held in cells? In the form of chromosomes. So inside your gamete, there are chromosomes. And as a matter of fact, there are chromosomes inside each of your gametes, which some poor schmuck, that'd be me, lovingly printed and cut and tried to make sure that you all had the right number of copies. We may have some trisomies today. We may have some offspring that are a chromosome short because, well, I make mistakes a lot. So, what do you know about a chromosome? So here's a chromosome. I'm going to draw it like that. If we look at one little section of that chromosome, what do we call one little section of that DNA? A short section of DNA is a gene. It's just a short segment of DNA. On each of those chromosomes, inside your gamete, and by the way, these are castor canadensis gametes. That's beavers. Ha. Beavers. Get it? Okay. You don't look nearly as entertained as I am by the whole thing, but that's fine. It's fine. You're going to have beaver babies. So, there are many, many, many genes on a single chromosome. But we are going to simplify it to start out with. So inside your gamete, you are going to find, you should find, 10 chromosomes. And each of those chromosomes will have one single gene listed on it. So I'm going to pass something out and then you can go. Okay, so we're walking through this and we're filling this out. We're starting off with the yellow, long chromosome. You should have either a big T or a little t. Now, how many of you remember things about dominant and recessive alleles? Anything?
I never understood how it works.
Okay, well, hopefully we can clear that up now. So, there are, an allele is one of the 2 options for a trait. And we talk about dominant alleles and recessive alleles. Let's take a moment and sort of backstory that. So a trait is just a characteristic of a species for which more than one option is possible. So in humans we think about eye color, skin color, hair color, and none of these are real binary. It's not like you have, you know, red hair or white hair, and we're seriously talking about like red and white, or you have brown hair or blonde hair. Look around. You've got tons of shades and in-betweens. It's way more complicated than we usually make it. But those are traits. Now, for each trait, there are generally 2 alleles. So an allele is the options for that trait. And with most alleles, we have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. And what's really important is that when we're doing very simple genetics work, we represent these alleles with either a capital letter or a lowercase letter. And the dominant allele, and it's always the same letter. We can't use different letters. It's got to be the same letter. The dominant allele is shown with a capital. The recessive allele is shown with a lowercase. If you have the dominant allele, it hides the presence of the other gene. Okay? That's kind of the basics of how that works. So what I want you to do right now, I'm going to put the spreadsheet up on the board that shows the genes that control the traits, and I want you to inventory your particular gamete. That'll get you through hair color on the yellow short, tooth size on the white long, claw size on the white short, and eye color on the brown long. And I'll tell you that the other option for eye color is red, and that's a lowercase b. That's the first 4 anyway. So you should be writing down your alleles. Do you have an extra gamete?
They said they can't read it.
Okay. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Can you read it now? Okay. And you should be through the first one. So the white long is, or the yellow short is hair color, big H, little h. You're missing, what are you missing?
I don't have a D. Is this a D or a 2 side?
It's a D.
I think I looked at it. I saw
Upside
T.
down.
I
That's
saw
so
T.
did Tyler. Okay. Creep minds think alike.
Is this supposed to be an L or a 1?
It would be an L.
So do we write the T now?
You write the trait that it controls, and the allele present is what you show on your chromosome. So if you have a lowercase h, allele present, you're going to put lowercase h.
Okay.
Yes. So once everybody's up to the brown long chromosome, we'll go to the next one. Yeah, at the end you'll pack them all up. So Gesundheit. Once you've gotten through brown long, oops. Can you still read that? So pink long control, there's a gene there that controls nose color. That's either big N or little n. Pink short has a gene controlling for ear color. That's big R, little r. The blue long chromosome has a gene that controls ear size, large ears, small ears. And the green long has a gene that controls oil production, big G, little g. So did you know that beavers cover themselves in beaver butt grease daily? They actually secrete an oily substance from their anal glands, and they rub it through their fur to keep themselves waterproof. It's like greasing a pair of boots before you go out on a wet day.